welcome everyone to the Spring 2023 Grantee Kickoff event for the Lonsdale Lagoons Individual Support Program. My name is Elena, and I just wanted to say welcome to everybody. And first, let me just go through what makes this program possible. It is a program supported by the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, Blue Thumb, and Metro Blooms. Today's presenters and project team. First, there's me, Elena Merkowitz. I am the Environmental Education Project Manager at Blue Thumb and Metro Blooms. So I'm in charge of a lot of the educational programs that we have and these presentations. And then we have Paul Erdman, who will be presenting a majority of the content today. He works with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources as their ecological science conservationist. And we also have Rebecca Rice, who is the director of Blue Thumb, and she will probably be popping in at the end to help answer some questions. And we also have Alexandra, who is our Minnesota Green Corps member today, who will be also helping with the presentation. And then last, there's John Bly, who we have a few special announcements from.
Hi, folks. I today will be trying to manage a chat and much more successfully, hopefully, managing the Q&A features you have before you. Looks like many of you have discovered them. Love to see it. Before we dive into the meat of this presentation, I do want to make sure that everyone here understands how these tools will work. As you might have picked up if you're looking at the webinar chat, things can go by really quick. And so we will not be taking questions from the chat. I will be trying to watch it and engaging and putting in relevant links where I can. But it's, the webinar we had last week, same topic. So if you were here last week, we're going to be going over the same stuff. We didn't have the chat, so we're trying a new thing here. If you have a question, we would love for it to be in the Q&A feature of Zoom. Now, before you post your question, it would be great if you read the questions that have already been asked. We're going to use this Q&A function to, at the end of our presentation, answer the most popular questions. And so before you type a question, please read through the questions that have already been asked. Your question might have already been asked and upvote it so that we know that we're answering the questions that are relevant to the largest number of folks here. I see we already have some questions, and it's quick enough. I'm just going to answer them all live right now. This webinar is not required. If you feel confident that you know how to do your project and what you're doing, you certainly do not have to be here now. There is a recording that will be made available after the presentation. So, that's another option. You can always refer to this later as well. So with that said, please just, put your questions in. We will answer them towards the end after we get through the presentation and vote on the questions you want answered. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Paul, would you like to take it away?
I sure can, Elena. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Paul Erdman with the Board of Water and Soil Resources. I help to manage the Lonsdale Legumes program with Dan Shaw, who couldn't be with us today. I just want to thank you all for joining us, taking time out of your busy day. I looked out this morning at another layer of ice on the driveway and the sidewalk, and I had to look it up, and we're just 76 days away from May 15th, the normal recommended date to start planting in gardens in Minnesota. So spring is coming. More snow on the way tonight first, though. a little more winter to get through. The one thing I keep reminding myself is in the metro, we've been in a really bad drought for 2 years, and all of the snow and rain will definitely help in the spring with their drought conditions. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming. This program started in 2019. We saw many of our bee and pollinator species declining in Minnesota and really throughout the United States. We have a rusty patch bumblebee you will hear us talk about a couple times today. That's our state bee, and that was once a very common bumblebee throughout Minnesota, the Midwest, and out to the East Coast. Its population has declined by more than 80% in just 20 years. So we kept seeing all of these different studies coming in, and what can we do for pollinators? And the one thing that we can do is provide pollinator habitat in our yards. We heard it from Minnesotans want to help pollinators. The focus of this is to establish pollinator habitat in projects on residential landscapes across Minnesota to support the rusty patch bumblebee and other pollinators. It's really to build a movement to get everybody interested in helping pollinators where they can. It's funded by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources through the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund. So they give us the money to Bowser partnered with Blue Thumb and Metro Blooms, and we all work together. But thanks to you all, without interest from you, there wouldn't be a Lawns to Legumes program. So thank you for participating and for your interest in helping pollinators. Thank you. So first off, why native plants? One of the big reasons is, one of the big goals of this program is to put native plants in the ground. We only reimburse for Minnesota native plants, and there is a couple of exceptions that we'll talk about, but we use native plants in conservation as they have many benefits. Can you go back to the previous slide, Elena? Thank you. Our native wildlife have adapted to these native plants, so they get the most value from them. The insects and pollinators that feed on these plants form the base of the food web. They in turn feed birds and other animals, depend on them, all the way on up the food chain to us humans. Some of these insects, like the monarch butterfly in the lower right-hand picture, is feeding on milkweed. They require specific plants like milkweed to complete their life cycle. But then when they're adult butterflies and they're ready to fly south for the winter, they need those great blazing star and liatris plants to fuel them up for their great journey south. Native plants have many other benefits. They have deep roots and they clean and infiltrate rainfall and stormwater. They also help to sequester carbon, and they also improve soil health. Next slide, please. So hopefully some of you are familiar with this term of a cultivar. A cultivar is just a short term for a cultivated variety. So these are plants that have been bred and genetically modified for aesthetics for people. We want them to, we like a certain trait in them, and so we bred them in a certain way because we liked how that looked. There was never any consideration really for wildlife or pollinators. So oftentimes in this process, they've had the pollen and the nectar bred out of them. Those valuable traits that were once beneficial to insects have actually been bred out of the plant. A nativar is a cultivar of a native plant. You'll see that term there. So all of this really defeats the purpose of the program. So these cultivars are not reimbursable, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll talk about. In this example, we have Gaillardia aristata, or blanket flower, the big picture in the green border. This is a plant that's native to Western Minnesota. but below that are 2 cultivated varieties, cultivars of the plant. So you would be able to be reimbursed for the true native plant on the top, but not the cultivated varieties. There's some tips here and more so in our guidance that you can see how to identify cultivars. They usually have quotes around the name. They oftentimes have an X if they're a hybrid. There sometimes will have trademarks or the little R by the name because certain companies specializes in those. So we always want you to look at plant tags and try to determine, are you buying an actual native plant, or are you buying a cultivar, or are you buying something else? We encourage you to shop at native plant nurseries. That's a really good tip to avoid cultivars because these native plant nurseries specialize in those. And I do want to say that not all cultivars are bad for pollinators or bad for wildlife. Some do provide excellent pollen and nectar for pollinators, but some do not. So we can't determine all of that, so they're not reimbursed under the grant. Here's a good example of some of this issue. So on the left, we have narrow-leaved purple coneflower. So this is a Minnesota native plant. On the right, we have eastern purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. This is a native plant, but not native to Minnesota. It's native to the southeast, southern, south of us. It's frequently used in native plant restorations, but it's not truly native. If you want the true native to Minnesota, you want to go for this narrow-leaved purple coneflower. You can see in the name, there's no quotes in this eastern purple coneflower because it is a native plant. Whereas if you go down to the columbine cultivar, you can see that swan blue and white, indicating that it is a cultivar of our wild columbine, which is on the left. And I put out this example on the bottom of the 9-bark shrub is a good shrub for wildlife. There's all kinds of different cultivars for it. And on the right is Donna May, so you can see the quotes and the trademark as well. I don't think it's this cultivar, but there's one cultivar that the leaves are actually toxic to insects. So you can see some of the negatives that can go along with cultivars. So native plant nurseries are going to know their stuff. They're going to not sell cultivars. On the bottom, there's some links on the slides. Minnesota Wildflowers is my go-to source for all things native plants, minnesotawildflowers.info. There's some other resources there as well that can help you determine what's a native plant, what's a cultivar, and so on. On the exceptions, so we do allow cultivars for 2 shrub species, the hawthorn and the serviceberries. Those are both shrubs that we allow for cultivars. And we do allow for a few non-native plants to be used in bee lawns, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So you are part of this public education and outreach. You are engaged in our public education and outreach campaign because we're trying to educate you on the program. You're also involved in the second bullet point here, the individual resident support. We've had our largest cohort, so you all are part of the spring cohort, and we awarded 2,000 grantees here that you all are a part of. The program that the part of the program that I work on mostly is this demonstration neighborhood, and those are larger grants of $20,000 to $40,000 that go out to cities and soil and water conservation districts and nonprofit neighborhood groups and others that get the community together to plant pollinator corridors throughout their community. And just one important note, if you happen to be lucky enough to have one of these demonstration neighborhoods in your area, you shouldn't get funding from both. You shouldn't get funding from this individual support grant and also get funding from demonstration neighborhoods, because we want to spread the funding out to as many people as we can. This map on the right here shows our priority areas for rusty patch bumblebees in Minnesota. The darker green shows where rusty patch bumblebees have been found. They actually were mostly been found in residential areas. So the work that you're doing is really critically important to providing habitat for rusty patch bumblebees and other pollinator species. We're happy to announce that we've now awarded grants in all 87 of our counties because maybe rusty patch bumblebee just hasn't been found in Northwest Minnesota yet because there's less people looking for it. So we still want to be able to provide pollinator habitat throughout the state. So some of the requirements for funding and the rest of the team will go into this in more detail, but we want you to maintain your projects for 3 years. Native plants need some time to establish. And so keeping the weeds down, keeping them watered is really important for them to thrive. Using locally adapted, local origin native vegetation is really important. We want you to source your plants within 175 miles of your planting area. And that has to do with genetic diversity and also, you know, a plant that was originally growing in the county next to you is going to fare better in your yard than a plant from Kansas. And we also know that the pollinators are adapted to those local species more so than plants from elsewhere in the country. They will also go into details about how to get reimbursement, but one important thing here is the third bullet point is we want you to protect your projects from pesticides. That's pesticides that kill insects, but it's also herbicides. It's also other chemicals that can be used frequently in gardening because that can certainly impact. That's also in the plants you buy. And we encourage you to go to native plant nurseries because they're also often not using these systemic pesticides in their plants. So you want to be aware of that issue and get plants that are free of pesticides. Okay, so basic steps for your successful project. You've confirmed the participation in the program, or you soon will. I believe you have already. And now we're going to move on to planning your project. There's 4 project types that are associated with that we want you to do with your $350. You can do a combination of these different types, but there's really 4 different types, and I'll go into detail on each one of these. The first is the native pocket plantings. These are, excuse me, these are small pocket plantings that can come in a variety of sizes and shapes and settings. They can be a rain garden, they can be a boulevard planting, they can be a buffer next to a lake, river, stream, wetland, stormwater pond, or they can just be a 10 by 10 section in your yard. And what's important to think about with this is start small. Like especially if you're new to native plant landscaping, don't bite off more than you can chew. Starting with a 10 by 10 foot garden is a great start. And recent studies have shown just providing 10 by 10 gardens in our yards can provide great habitat for pollinators. And just imagine if everybody in your block or in your area put in a 10 by 10 garden, how much all of that would add up to. So that is the pocket garden. That is our most popular planting from former grantees. Next up is pollinator beneficial trees and shrubs. This is our second most popular planting. Trees and shrubs can add another dimension to your yard and garden. They also provide early season forage for pollinators. So in another month or so, I encourage you to walk out to your closest red maple or sugar maple look up and see all of the pollinator activity in the flowers, and those early season flowers. Those are the queen bumblebees and other bees just coming out from hibernation, from their long winter, and they need to get that food and energy going to start that new generation of bees. These plants can also provide serve as host plants and homes and refugia for pollinators. Lots of moths and butterflies. The host plants are trees and shrubs. They can produce edible fruit for humans and other wildlife. They can play a role in heating and cooling and climate change by providing shade, and maybe protecting your house in the winter. And of course, they can provide some autumn color and winter structure. Pollinator lawns is another practice, and this is the one where we do allow a couple of non-native species to use. So our next practice we're going to show is a pollinator meadow, but perhaps you have a section of your yard that you just want to have as a, you can have some traffic on it, you have kids that are going to use it, you want to put a lawn chair out there and recreate it, and you don't want taller plants in it. This pollinator lawn might be for you. So it can withstand some traffic. It looks more lawn-like. It uses shorter plants. The main component of these are fine fescues, though, and that's a very deep-rooted grass that requires very little watering once established, and also very little mowing once established. You can see some of the other species. Self-heal is a native species, but the seed that you get is usually not from Minnesota. Fine fescue, we do have one native fescue, but most of the fescues in these mixes are not native. Dutch white clover is a non-native species, but does have benefit for pollinators. A lot of our lawn seed mixes 50 years ago had Dutch white clover in it it's a legume that fixes nitrogen in the soil. And creeping thyme is another non-native species that has some benefit and works. There's other species that can be used in these pollinator lawns, and it's really an evolving practice. Next up is our pollinator meadow. And so maybe you want to take out a whole big chunk of your yard and make it a shortgrass prairie, which is basically what this practice is duplicating. Again, it's best to start small. Maybe start with a section of your pollinator meadow one year, expand into other areas the next year. But we're going to talk more about this. You want to have a nice mix of grasses and flowers. Native grasses can provide just as many benefits as our flowers to pollinator bee species. A little bit about the design. You'll find more of this in the guidance and things like that, but you want to make your planting look as intentional as possible so your neighbors and your neighborhood and passerbys can see that this is a planned, intentional planting, that you're not a lazy lawn person, that you're trying to provide habitat for bees and encourage others to do it. And so there's just some examples here. You can incorporate stone edging materials that look nice and help frame your garden. Mulch and edging are the eligible project expenses, but you want to think about borders and paths. Sometimes people will put sculptures in here, bird baths to make it look more intentional. You want to have what we call cues to care. So people know what you're doing is intentional. You're making a garden. It just so happens to be a pollinator garden with native plants. Signage is a good way to do that, and we'll talk more about that, but you'll be sent a nice Lawns to Legumes sign once you complete your project. This is a very short slide to consider when planning your projects, but it hits on the main things, and it's how much sunlight is there. Do you have an area that gets mostly sun throughout the day? or do you have a bunch of oaks and other trees in your yard and you're making a shady garden? The next bullet point, not only what is the soil moisture on the site, but what kind of soil do you have? Is it clay soil? Is it sandy soil? All of these things are going to help you determine what kind of plants to pick for your garden. The last bullet point is really important. We want to have you have blooming flowers throughout the growing season. Most of our native plants and prairie species bloom in the summer, so that's usually not an issue. But do you have those early blooming spring flowers? So there's something there for those queen bumblebees when they emerge. For those early species, when there's not a lot of other food around, are you providing some food? And the same thing on the tail end in the fall. Are you providing some asters and some goldenrods and other species that are providing good forage for these pollinators before the long 8-month winter? Again, a mixture of grasses, flowers, and shrubs. So grasses can oftentimes, our forbs or our flowers get a little leggy and want to flap over. Providing structure with grasses in there is good. I would add to this list sedges. Hopefully some of you are familiar with sedges, and they're usually lower growing, and so oftentimes make a better fit in a small garden. If you can fit in a shrub to add more of that structure, some of that early blooming is great. Keeping species grouped together, it's easier for you to identify it, to say, oh, here's a butterfly milkweed, here's a butterfly milkweed, here's my third one because I planted them in threes. I like that rule of threes. Sometimes people do fours or fives, but keeping them grouped together will make it easier for you. And it's also more beneficial for the pollinators and makes them easier for them to find the flowers they want and move around to certain flowers when they're in bloom. Putting shorter plants in front are the guidance materials. We'll talk more about this, but you want to think about what's your location, and big blue stem and Indian grass get up to 7 feet tall. And so maybe you don't want to incorporate those in your garden, but maybe you want little blue stem or some sedges that are much shorter, and thinking about where to place those in your garden, where it's going to look the best. So you've planned your project, and now it's time to install your project. Most of you have to have I believe all of you have to have your projects completed by July 15th. So a lot of you are going to use this sod removal method. If you're putting your garden in an area that's currently turf grass, you need to remove that sod, turn and loosen and rake the soil. We do want you to use mulch your first year of plantings. That's going to help retain moisture and deter weeds. It's also going to make it look a little showier, make it more attractive to show people what you're doing is great work. This can start at any time once the ground thaws. So be thinking about when you're going to prep your site and get it ready, and it could sit like this you could get it all ready and mulch it and wait until May 15th to plant your plants. Next slide, please. Another one of our preferred methods, a couple of our preferred methods are on this slide. And so this is using sheet mulch with a layer of cardboard or cupboards, cardboard covered with mulch to suffocate the grass beneath. You can also solarize a site in your yard. So that's using clear plastic and letting the sun just cook that turf grass to kill it off, make it too hot, prevent moisture from getting into it. And that's going to kill off that turf grass. That will only work in a sunny area. But we do encourage you to use organic site preparation methods and not use herbicides when you're prepping your site. You can learn more about these methods at the Xerxes Society organic site preparation in our guidance materials. Okay, you've got your garden prepped and you're ready to plant. So you first want to, what we skipped over there in the design is it's good to have a map of your yard. Go to Google Maps, take a picture of your aerial photo of your yard, kind of sketch that out and determine where you're going to put your garden, what's it going to look like. Our guidance materials will help you with that. But you want to follow that plan then and lay out your plants and space them where you need them. And keep in mind, in this picture in the lower left-hand corner, that's blue flag iris. And that plant is about yay big right now, but in the right conditions, that plant will be huge. And so keep that in mind. We usually say 1.5 feet spacing. Maybe you want to space them closer together or further apart, but things will fill in. You want to protect your soil from erosion. So it's a beautiful sunny day when this person's planting, but the next day they get a huge 2-inch rain event, and you want to prevent soil eroding from those plants blowing out that you just planted. So keep those things in mind. Tree and shrub planting, there's a little more to that. You want to dig a hole that's twice as deep, at least twice as wide as the root ball. Straighten or remove circling roots so the root doesn't girdle the tree and kill it. You want to place the tree at the appropriate height. You don't want it too shallow that it'll dry out. You don't want it too deep that it will not be able to grow well and it could kill the tree. And then you gently, firmly backfill the hole, watering periodically to reduce air pockets. Any new tree and shrub should be watered frequently for the best success. If you live in an area like me that has lots of rabbits and deer, you might want to consider protecting your trees and shrubs from with fencing or other materials to prevent them from browsing on them. On pollinator lawns, I'm no expert at this, but we have guidance that shows you how to do it. If you don't have a bunch of creeping Charlie or other aggressive invasives, this method might work for you. You want to mow your lawn as short as possible, rake up all those clippings to expose as much soil as possible. And then the next slide will show after we see the lawnmower and the rake. You go in and spread your bee-lawn seed mix. This is, again, native plant nurseries. Others sell these bee-lawn mixes that are specific for this practice. Spread that seed. You can add some compost or sand to make a good bulking agent to show you where you've put down the seed and get good coverage. Keeping it moist until sprouting and then cut back and stop watering. Maintenance, never again mow below 3 inches, trim in the fall. We don't want you to use those herbicides because you could be killing the plants that you're trying to grow to start with. The pollinator meadow, again, bit by bit, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't take, unless you're an expert or you have a lot of help, don't take on your whole yard. Take a quarter of your yard first and expand out from there. Use smaller plant plugs to stretch your dollar. You can also use seed. Check with the supplier of your native seed or seed mixes for specific planting instructions. Again, these people that are selling you the material are usually experts and know their stuff. So always ask them for guidance and help. Again, protecting against erosion, and gather your friends together for planting day, for prep day. Offer your favorite cold beverage or lemonade. Get them involved in the practice, your friends and your family. One note here, so some seeds need a period of cold, moist stratification. So if you just went out in the spring and seeded a certain forb, it might not grow until the following year because it needs a certain period of cold, moist stratification to allow it to germinate. So that's just something to keep in mind. Not all plants are like that. Next slide, please. So finally, last for me, I think we want you to maintain your projects. Water during dry periods, at least 1 inch per week. Hopefully we're coming out of this drought and we won't have to worry about watering as much, but get a rain gauge, get a tin can, get something that helps you tell, are we getting an inch of rainfall per week? Nope, I didn't get it. I have to go out and supplement that with the garden hose. These plants, once their roots are established, really require little to no watering, but you do have to water them the first and possibly the second year if it's really dry. Pull those weeds. This example on the bottom is a tree species that it's just showing you want to pull a bad tree that you don't want before it becomes a huge tree and a bigger issue to deal with. Again, keeping it neat and tidy so those cues to care, the neighbors know it's an intentional planting, and you may have to replace mulch and plants as needed. I often tell people that mulch isn't needed after the first few years because you want the plants to fill in and you can lessen up on the mulch, but that's a personal preference too.
So now it's my turn to talk about resources to help you with all of this stuff, because we know that all of this information we're going over, we could talk about each slide for like 20 minutes. So there's so much different information. There's so many different plant lists and all that sort of stuff to help you with each different part of planning your project and installing your project. So I'm going to quickly go over where you can find some of those resources. So first, to start off, is I highly recommend you check out the resources page on the Blue Thumb site. That is where we have pretty much all of our stuff that you can download and reference, things like plant lists, design templates, all the information you may need to know about rain gardens or shore stabilizations, and generally just planting guides. And there's even a whole section about lawns to lagoons guides specifically for grantees. And this is where you can find planting templates, which we have heard from grantees in the past who have said that those have been particularly helpful for them, especially if they are pretty new to the planting process. So definitely check out the resources page on Blue Thumb. On that page, you will find the Planting for Pollinators design guide, which is a super comprehensive guide made for L2L grantees to help really walk you through the different steps for the different types of projects. So that's where you can get all sorts of information if you really have a lot of hesitancy about what you're doing and if you need some really specific help. So definitely check that out. Once again, you can find that on the resources page at Blue Thumb. We also recommend that you check out the Lawns to Lagoons tab on Blue Thumb. That's where you can find the DIY planting guide that will just walk you through the different steps of what you need to do as an L2L grantee and the steps for being reimbursed and just all the different parts of the process. So yeah, that's the grantee guide. And then there's a planting guide, which is very helpful for just the whole planting process for different projects. So it's a lot of different resources that cover somewhat similar material, but maybe in slightly different ways. So if you're ever confused, definitely check out all of the resources on Blue Thumb. On the planting guide, that's where you can find the native plants nurseries and retailers list. That is a very helpful resource that we've heard from grantees who have said that they've just been totally unsure where to source native plants. The nurseries that are on that list, many of them will offer delivery or online ordering. Many of them offer itemized receipts, which can help you speed up the process of your reimbursement. So we highly recommend you check out those that native nursery list on the Lawns to Lagoons page on Blue Thumb. We also have just opened up a new resource, which is our online learning series, which is an entirely free resource for all Minnesota residents. And that is different reportings of the landscape designers here at Blue Thumb and Metro Blooms talking through all of the content of our Resilient Yards workshops. And there's also another course on the online learning series besides the Resilient Yards workshop one, there is one all about turf alternatives that is has the presenter James Wolfen from Twin City Seed, who is incredibly knowledgeable about all things bee lawn and alternatives to your turf. And then we also have just recently opened up our live workshops. So if you want to check out this page, you can see where you can sign up to attend a live workshop. And at these, we highly encourage that you go through the online learning series beforehand. And then if you go to a Resilient Yards live workshop, you can have time with our landscape designers to give direct feedback on your project. So you can really talk to professionals about what your yard looks like and what your dreams are, and really just get that extra guidance. And the last resource I'm going to talk about is brand new this year, and we're super excited to talk about it and launch it. It's called The Hive. That is a new community platform that we've developed specifically for L2L grantees. So it was developed in response to the feedback we got from grantees about wanting to have different ways to connect with each other and share resources and share knowledge and experience, and really just get a sense of community with each other, because ultimately you can't really create a movement, isolated in your own bubble. And we want to make sure that everybody can really feel supported in this network. So we have the Hive now available to you. And we're just super excited about that. And we are open to feedback also, because it is new, and we are constantly wanting to develop and grow the Lawns to Legumes program. And so please offer us any feedback you may have on the Hive. So yeah, I've gone through the resources, and Alexandra, would you like to talk about reimbursements?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take it away. So the last step in your project is really submitting for your reimbursement. That's what the grant is all about. So we'll go ahead and just walk through what some of those steps look like. When you are ready, when you've completed your project and you're ready to submit for reimbursement, you're able to find that directly under the Lawns to Legumes tab on our Blue Thumb website page. And it's also in the grantee guide. So when you're ready and your project's completed, it's really easy to find this form to fill out. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Some important things to note for your reimbursement request. We have specific eligible expenses that we will reimburse for, and the majority of your reimbursement is going to be for native vegetation that you end up planting. So at least 70% of your reimbursement request must be for native vegetation. And then the other 30% can go towards other eligible expenses like wood mulch or compost as a soil amendment or edging for your project. We also cover delivery fees. So this especially comes up if you are having to order plants from a nursery that does delivery. We'll cover those fees for those plants getting delivered to your house. And then a lot of our grantees might also run into the problem of they don't have a sod kicker, and the only one available is through a rental service. So we cover equipment rental for things like that. That is probably the most highly covered tool that we end up getting from grantees is renting a sod kicker. And then for renters who don't own their home, we also want to make this program as accessible to you as possible and still get native plants in those areas as well. So we will cover up to $100 for planters or raised bed materials for any grantee who doesn't own their property. And then when you're submitting all of these expenses, you'll submit receipts with them as well, itemized receipts that we can see. And it's important that we won't reimburse for any material that was bought before you knew you were awarded a grant. So everything has to be dated after February 3rd. If you're like me and you bought some native seeds already because you were like super stoked back in January, that's great. We want those in your yard. We just unfortunately won't be able to reimburse for them. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. And then the next thing with the reimbursement is you're also going to have to document that you've matched the grant, provided a 25% match to the grant. So if you are requesting the full reimbursement, the full $350, you'll need to document that you've provided a match that's valued at around $88. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. The first is pretty obvious. It's just a monetary match to say that you have spent an additional $88 or around there on eligible expenses. So whether that be mulch or edging or additional plants, as long as they were eligible to be reimbursed before, they'll count towards the match. The second way that we can that you can contribute a match is actually just with an in-kind donation. So what that means is that any time you spend on planning, planting, or maintaining your project throughout the grant period, we value that time at $25 an hour. So we can't pay you for that time. We can't reimburse that time that you spent, but we will count it towards your match. So if you are out putting in a rain garden and you take note of the day and how long you were out working that day, I think it ends up being like something close to 3 hours or a little bit, 3.5 hours, will get you to that match, and you can record that on your reimbursement as well. And then another thing that we require for the reimbursements is we want to see your before and after pictures. And one reason for this is just so that we can confirm that you did get your plants put in the ground and we can see that it's a new planting we're reimbursing for. Another thing is we just get really excited about it. This is our favorite thing to look at is your completed project. So when you go to take those before photos, you're going to want to do it before you do really any prep at all. And it just needs to be a couple of really simple shots that give us some context as to like where on your property the project is going. And when you take those photos, you're going to want to take note. You can, put a note in your phone, or if you have a site assessment or planting plan, go ahead and mark down where in your yard you were standing when you took those photos, so you can take them from relatively the same place once your project's completed. And when you go to take your after photos and you're standing in the same spot, making it really easy for us to compare, we also want to note that we understand the projects may not be like as beautiful as you're hoping. Like Paul had said before, native plantings take a couple of years to establish, and we fully understand that. So as long as you can show that the area was seeded or that you've got your little plugs in the ground, we are happy with those after photos. And then in a couple of years, or for some of you, it may just be in the fall, you end up getting a really beautiful photo of your garden, maybe coming into some maturity. Go ahead and email that to us. We love to see those photos as well. So to kind of wrap up this section here, I just want to go over the timeline for you again. So obviously you all have already been notified of your award and accepted. We're really excited to have you on board. We've got, I think, over 1,600 grantees who have confirmed their acceptance of the award for this spring. So we're really, really excited about that. Next week, we're going to be hosting our first lawns to legumes specific webinar. So that will be on resilient shorelines. And then we'll be hosting a webinar specifically for lawns to legumes participants pretty much every week thereafter for the month of March. So these will have a lot of the same content as our live webinars. They just won't, because they'll be much larger, we won't have as much of an opportunity to do breakout sessions. So these are really, really great opportunities to come and learn. I just want to make that extra note that you won't be getting to meet with a designer during any of these meetings. And then for anyone who has requested a coach, you will be we'll be notifying your coaches of who they've been matched with at the end of this week, and you should be hearing from them in the next couple of weeks. If you wanted a coach and weren't able to get one, highly, highly encourage you to join the Hive community space. We'll have some coaches who will be going through questions that are posted there and answering questions. And of course, other grantees who have some expertise or experience in gardening might be able to help you out anyway. So really encourage you to show up in that space. We're hoping it'll be a big help. And then, of course, the project deadline for you this year is July July 15th. So all of your reimbursement requests and supporting documents are due July 15th. We do accept those reimbursement requests on a rolling basis. And we'll process them as they come in. But no, as we get closer and closer to that July 15th deadline and we get hundreds of these requests a day, it takes us a little longer to process them. So please be patient with us as we work through that. And then once we have received and processed your reimbursement, you will also be getting an Lawns Legumes yard sign to add to your garden and share with your neighbors kind of about the project you were a part of. That takes us a little bit longer to send out because we have to individually package them ourselves. And it's a fun time, but know that later in the summer, you should be getting one of those as well. And so now I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to John, who's been kind of monitoring the Q&A, so we can answer some of your questions with the time we have left.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'm actually going to hand it over to Elena to read the questions out, and then we'll be answering them. And then some of us will also be answering. So Elena will read the most popular to the least, and we'll also be answering some of the questions that probably won't get to be asked out loud through chat.
So the top question was answered just recently. It was, when do we find out if when we will be matched with a mentor, so a coach? And the date was March 3rd, correct?
That's when coaches will get your contact information, and then they'll be responsible for reaching out to you in the following 2 weeks.
Awesome. So Edith asked, how large does the garden have to be to qualify?
There is no minimum size. You know, a 10 by 10 garden is a great way to get started. You can fit a good number of plants that bloom throughout the growing seasons. But there's, you know, if all you can do is a, you know, postage stamp garden by your mailbox, that's, you know, whatever you can do. Great place to start.
So the next one is there a list of native plant nurseries in the state that can be accessed? So yes, we have a list specifically of nurseries that have responded to a survey we sent out at one point. So you can find that list on the Blue Thumb site, and on the resources page on the Blue Thumb site, you can also find other lists that aren't just the Lawns to Legumes native nursery list. So there's a few different options if you want to sort through different places to find the native plants. And we're also hoping, once again, that the hive will be a great place for grantees to be able to share where they know what plants are, you know, available in certain regions of the state. So hopefully that's a big help too. Okay, so we have another one. Will I have better success by seeding my pocket garden or by using seedlings?
I can take that one. Just give it your timeline and that you guys have to be done by July 15th. I would recommend the buying containerized plants, the seedlings or the plugs versus seed. Just because if you certainly could use seed and it'd be a lower cost option, but you're not going to see as good of results until the following year. Whereas if you were in the fall cohort and you had to get your planting done by, I would still recommend using containerized plants just because you're going to see results faster.
The next question is, what would you recommend somebody do to get rid of a large patch of Creeping Charlie in their lawn?
I can take that one. You want to move away. You want to sell the property and find a different place to live. Creeping Charlie is very tenacious. There's all kinds of crap that you can buy that it says that you spray it on and it'll kill it, but it doesn't. So I'd avoid that. Hand weeding for consecutive years, because You want to prevent it from flowering and seeding and making more plants, but you're also dealing with that seed bank that's in the soil. So if you're converting that area, I would recommend digging out as much as you can when you start, laying down a thick layer of mulch, and then plan on weeding the creeping Charlie whenever you see it for a couple of years.
And Becky, I saw that you were interested in also answering that one too, or was
Which
that?
one?
Becky had like clicked on.
Yeah, I can say that creeping Charlie, sorry. You know, I have had success getting rid of creeping Charlie using the solarizing method. So it takes a while, but it is effective.
So we'll do a few more questions because it's getting close to 1. The next one is, I'm hiring a contractor to grade my property for a rain garden. I'm unsure if he will be able to complete the project by the deadline. What happens if the deadline passes and the project is not yet complete?
I can take that. Okay, I will give you facts. In the past, we have allowed grantees to request an extension of their project in past cohorts. We have not decided if we're doing that, so I'm not guaranteeing that that's possible. And we want you to get your project done now in the spring. But that is an option that might become available. Otherwise, what might be possible is if parts of your garden, if you undertake a project that's much larger than can be finished before July 15th, as long as part of it is done and has plants that you've purchased and in the ground so you can take an after picture of, that too would be one way to get reimbursed for it.
Sorry, I just lost my place. How soon can someone put in for reimbursement? Does the project need to be completed fully with pictures?
We need those after pictures. They might not be beautiful, but they'll be beautiful to us.
And how soon are we opening reimbursement?
It's impossible to put a project in right now. You know, the ground's frozen beneath a foot of snow in most parts of the state. So we will open up reimbursement, you know, probably sometime in April, which might still be too early to do a project.
So I'll do 2 more questions and then we should we'll have to say goodbye. But how can grantees access the Hive? So we will be sending out a link to access that. Alexandra, do you have more to add?
I was just gonna say, yeah, we are planning on sending out a link for you to access that hopefully this week. And we will also be granting coaches access to that as well. So checking your email, you'll get a recording of the webinar today or the one from last week, and a link to join the Hive as well.
So the last question we have time for is, can you apply for the same grant next year?
At this point, no. Maybe you guys can tell me. So we are meeting with 186 people, but we had 2,000 in this cohort and we had like 8,000 people apply. So we want to be able to get out all of the funding to everybody that hasn't gotten a grant yet. As time moves on in the future, we'll certainly think about that, awarding people again, who have already been awarded, but we want to be able to spread out the funding to everybody that wants to do this great work.
Yeah, there's so many more questions too that we just don't have time to answer, but we hope that the resources we have on the Blue Thumb site will be of some guidance. You can feel free to ask questions on the Hive or to email us your questions. So yeah, hopefully at some point you'll get your questions answered. But we just want to say thank you all for attending today, and we're really excited to have so many people who want to be a part of the change. So yeah, thank you for attending today.